about Garcelle. Let's take a look at Edwidge Danticat's short story, A Wall of Fire Rising. First of all, it's important to note that this takes place in Haiti, which is a place where there's widespread poverty. We hear that the family, Guy, Lily, and Little Guy, live in a shack in a shanty town, and it's important for us to realize that Haiti doesn't just have pockets of poverty or certain neighborhoods, but rather there's widespread poverty. And this is important because it is part of Guy's motivation to make a change. It is part of why Guy sees his life as untenable, to just continue to go on with the grinding way he is. They don't always have food. They live in really difficult conditions physically, and we get details of that from the story. And even though their son is a bit of a bright spot in their lives, it's a really hard life. It's a physically and emotionally hard life. So poverty motivates Guy, and that's why, as part of the setting, it's really important. Okay, the next major thing to notice is the element of bookman in the story. So bookman is the name of a historical figure, a man who led an uprising of enslaved people that was successful. So out of that revolt came the independent nation of Haiti, in which slavery was not allowed. So this is a hero, a Haitian hero of history, and the little boy is able to memorize these lines of a speech where he gets to play bookman in the school play, and it's a source of pride for his parents, and it's a bright spot and an inspiration, really. Now, there are two ironies, though, with this speech the boy is learning. For one, all the grandiose or just hopes, just not even grandiose hopes, but just hopes for a future without slavery, a future of some prosperity, of freedom. Those hopes have not been fully realized, right? So in the speech, there's this look toward a grand future. And then we have alongside that the reality of the future. So we see Guy and Lily and Little Guy not living in the kind of world that the bookman would have wished, right, and envisioned. So we have the wished for future against the actual future. The other thing we have is the fact that the language of the speech is in a European style. So the imprint of colonial rule is still on the people and on the education system and on the language. So there's freedom in the sense that France no longer rules over Haiti, but there's this lingering effect. And so even though this is a Haitian hero, and it's in the speech that this hero speaks in the play is in the mouth of a Haitian boy, the words he's using are actually in a European style. And so still, hundreds of years later, we still have this European stamp or cloud maybe over the people. And so the speech ought to be a rousing, cultural affirmation, and instead it's a reminder of the colonial past. Okay, so another element to look at here is the title of the story, A Wall of Fire Rising. So the Wall of Fire does refer to the historical use of fire as a weapon during the slave uprising, as the enslaved people decided to fight against their oppressors, their enslavers. They used fire by setting fire to the fields, and there were actual walls of fire on the island. And that was then, fire was then a mechanism of power, of hope, related to forcefulness, and this fire was useful, right? But now look at fire in the story. In particular, we have the fire of the balloon. The heat of the fire makes the hot air balloon rise. And as you know from reading the story, this is not all good. So yes, the balloon is a symbol of hope. It's about flight and freedom. Guy definitely looks at it as almost a nearly a magical way for him to transcend his situation and rise above, literally. But what is it really? I mean, it's a toy for the rich people, the owners of the factory, right? It's a pleasure device. If the rich folks who own it actually go up in it, they literally look down on all the other people. So all the labor of these masses of people is to make this guy rich, right? And let him buy things like hot air balloons. It's not a happy situation. It doesn't feel like a just situation. So the symbol of the balloon and then the fire is not altogether positive. So fire may have freed people from slavery in the past, but in a way the people are still enslaved, not in a literal way, true, but they're in the bondage of the economic hardship. And the fire in the balloon, for Guy, yes, it is still hope, it is still freedom, but of course we know how that ends tragically. So it's a mixed situation here with like what does the balloon really mean and what does it stand for? It depends on who you are, which character you are and at what point in the story. Okay, so where else does fire show up? It also shows up as kerosene lamps. And these are really weak lights compared to what you probably have in your living room. And there's one that's small and there's one that's even smaller. So the diminishment of fire in their life is clear. Maybe the wall of fire was rising, but now what do we have? This diminished little tiny lights is what's in their home. And look at Guy when he lights a lighter and sets fire to a little piece of paper as a kind of a model for what he knows the balloon would be like. So diminished, so small, insignificant, really. It's sad because the true power of the fire is is it's not captured in the little lighter or in the kerosene lamps, and the true power of the people is also not coming to fruition at all, since they are in this situation of poverty. We have unrealized potential here. There's another source of light in the story to mention, and that's the moon. Guy says that the moon winks down at them, and then it floats to brighter shores away from them. So away from their sad place and over to somewhere where things are better. And of course, Guy thinks about how can I get there to where things are better, where I could be a new person, where I could have dignity and self-respect. So brighter shores. The moon gets to go there, but the people don't. And it's worth mentioning here that for a lot of Haitians, brighter shores is literally the United States shores. So sure, brighter shores, kind of a general idea of better places, but the United States is where a lot of people have been able to emigrate out of Haiti to the United States, including Edwidge Danticat's family, the author. So at age 12, she comes to the United States to the brighter shore, where there is more opportunity, there is more potential for making a life that is, less riddled with lack. Okay, so let's talk about the ending. The question is, does Guy commit suicide here? Is it deliberate? Was he planning it ahead of time? These are all hard questions to answer. We know that Guy is thinking about what kind of legacy he will leave when he dies, because he does say, how is a man judged when he's gone? And his wife says, well, by his deeds. So Guy is looking at his deeds, which is just work and work and work and work. And he's looking at his father, who worked and worked and worked and, could not get ahead in any kind of way, died. And Guy's not proud of that. Like, he doesn't look at his father as an example for what his life ought to be. In fact, it's a counterexample. It's what he wants to not be. And he wants his son to look at him with something different. So his deeds, yeah. Guy will be remembered for his one spectacular deed and death. Um, and maybe that's what he wants. Maybe he's thinking, you know what, it's worth it. I'm going to take that balloon. I'm going to have a few minutes of freedom, and at least my life will have had that. And even if I die, it's worth it. Maybe he was thinking that way. Maybe a bit of evidence for that is the fact that he doesn't talk about landing the balloon. You know, like what's his plan? He just wants to be up in the balloon and go to a new place, be a new person. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't quite finish that thought. Like, how do you actually get down? um, so maybe that's some evidence to point to the fact that he never meant to come down in a normal way. He knew he would die, or that he would have to jump. On the other hand, I wonder if he even thought that far. I wonder if he's obsessed with the idea of taking it up, of trying it out, and uh, being able to have it lift off, floating free above the world. And of course, when he's up there, people are waving, you know, their hats and their kerchiefs and so on, and they even say, "Go, beautiful." He is inspiring to everyone else for those minutes. You know, one of their own people is there flying. It's pretty miraculous. And maybe he hadn't thought about what else might happen. Maybe he was just so caught up in it that. And then notice he either jumps down or climbs out and then lets go, but he definitely falls. But where does he fall? He falls close to his wife and child. So this is interesting. Did he plan it that way? Is this his way of including them in his dream after all? Is this his way of saying, I didn't forget about you? I had to do this, but I didn't forget about you. I didn't fly off without you. I came back to you. Of course, I died, but here I am. I don't know. His thinking at this point is hard to pin down because, of course, it is a drastic decision he's made, and it can't end well. And so you wonder, wow, why did he do this? But of course, we saw that he feels that the situation he's living through is not tenable for him. Like he cannot go on with this grinding poverty and this lack of respect for himself. And so the balloon gives him that, even though it's very short-lived. Another thing I notice as reading this part is that the owner of the balloon says, you know what, he's higher up than you think. When people on the ground say, look, he's just here above us. Maybe Guy had that same misconception of distance. Maybe he thought he was lower to the ground than he really was. I wonder if when he jumped, he thought he might actually survive that jump. And he jumped toward his family and he thought maybe he would live. I don't know. Perhaps it is a suicide, though. And if it is, then he died in order to have this taste of freedom. If he jumped and thought he would live, then it's a tragic thing that he wasn't able to both taste the freedom and live. Now, as I was reading this story, one of the things I thought of immediately was the Greek myth of Icarus and Daedalus. Icarus flew too close to the sun as he was flying and fell to his death. So you can see why I connected that with this story. In the Greek myth, you have Icarus as the son of Daedalus. They're both trapped in a maze. So they're trapped in, and so is Guy, right? And his family, they're trapped as well in poverty. But Daedalus and Icarus are in a maze, a labyrinth, actually. Daedalus designs wings that let them fly out of the maze. Daedalus warns his son, do not fly too close to the sun because the wax holding your wings together will melt and you will fall. And that's exactly what happens. Icarus does fly close to the sun. He does fall. He dies. He falls into the sea. So how is this like Guy? Well, he definitely is trapped. He tries to escape through flight. He dies, having reached for something. Now, the message that usually is told about Icarus is that story teaches that a person shouldn't reach beyond what they're supposed to have in this world. Like you shouldn't reach for knowledge that's forbidden, or you shouldn't try to do something that's beyond you. That you take a big risk to do that, like you're flying too high. Is that what Guy did? Did he take a big risk that was fatal? I think he actually had some idea that he would die, but he definitely had to try to rise above his situation. And really, his being trapped in poverty was just as motivating as being trapped in a labyrinth. Did he attempt too much? Did he die because he dreamed? Did he die because he dared to hope for something better, for freedom, for a new life? Possibly. Yeah, possibly the idea of freedom is what killed him. In any case, his wife seems to forgive him because she says, "Leave his eyes open. My husband likes to look at the sky." She knows this is the man he was. Even though she pushes back when they're discussing it and she says, "Hey, don't you think you could get hurt? Don't you think your dream should include us?" And he's saying, "Well, you're really good with the boy. Maybe he's thinking they'll be okay without him." Hard to tell, but the closing lines with her talking about leaving his eyes open seems to be a signal that she actually accepts that this is right for him, or it was inevitable for him, and she is accepting that. And actually, this story is part of a whole collection of short stories, and in a different story later on, there is reference back to this story, and it mentions that the son actually did go to the United States, but the wife commits suicide because she's alone. She has neither husband nor son with her. So, yes, the wall of fire rising. The word rising sounds very hopeful, but maybe the challenge rising, the challenge of being poor is what really rose and overwhelmed these people and leads to these kinds of desperate acts as a man tries to find self-respect and freedom and transcend the bleak conditions in which he finds himself. Okay, another thing that I'm put in mind of as I read this story is the Colombian writer Gabrielle Garcia Marquez. He has a famous quote where he says, "To oppression, we respond with life." Now, Colombia has had a similar colonial past as Central America, South America has had with Spain, Portugal. So, how does one respond to oppression? How does one respond to difficult conditions, even dehumanizing conditions? Marquez says we respond with life. Maybe this is what Guy did. He's responding with life, with an attempt to have a moment of glory, a moment of agency where he gets to choose his freedom and his death. Or, what's his option? His option is to respond with submission, right, as his father did. So he does respond to oppression with life that ends, but for a few moments is lived on his own terms. Okay, well, I'd love to know what you think about this story and whether you have some new ideas to add to this. And please join me for another video.